Welcome to the Holy Post. A court has ruled that a Christian-owned business is not required to pay for health insurance that includes drugs to prevent HIV. Is the ruling a victory for religious liberty, or a case of Christians unfairly imposing their beliefs on others? In an effort to bring God back into the public schools, Texas now requires schools to display "In God We Trust" signs. But what happens when the sign is in Arabic? Southern governors are shipping undocumented immigrants north, but is their goal to actually solve the immigration crisis, or are they using vulnerable people for partisan stunts? Then pastor and culture watcher Mark Sayers is back to talk about his new book, A Non-Anxious Presence. He says we've entered a new cultural era riddled with anxiety and uncertainty that Christian leaders are just not equipped to deal with. He draws from Friedman's family systems theory to offer an alternative vision of what leadership in this new age looks like. All of that, plus annual awards for hilarious scientific achievements. Here is episode 527. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm Sky Jitani. Phil has left us this week. He got a break and took off with his wife for some much needed R&R, so I'm kind of piloting the ship on this episode, which is a little scary, but I'm not doing it alone because Christian Taylor's with me. Hi, Christian.
Hey, Sky. How are you?
And because Phil couldn't be here, we got Caitlin to join us too. So it's Sky and the ladies today.
Lucky you.
Very lucky me. So we'll see how this goes while the cat's away, if the mice will play, or maybe it's while the vegetable's away. I don't know what the rest of that would be, but Phil's gone, so we're going to try this out.
Well, and Caitlin, so nice to be on an episode with you. Super wonderful to see your lovely face. And
well, you guys were together on the 500th episode, but this is kind of a regular thing.
But yeah, it's been a really long time since before that. I mean,
right.
Yeah. I miss seeing Christian's face.
I know. I miss seeing yours too. And I love everything you have to say. So it's always great to be able to dialogue with you. So thanks for coming on today.
Aw, you too.
All right, here's the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian.
Okay, so we got a bunch of stories. We're going to do like a Texas-themed day.
I don't like that.
Because I found a bunch of stories that happen to be from Texas, but they'll branch out to other things. We'll hit other places like Florida and Martha's Vineyard and stuff like that. But to begin with, have either of you guys heard of the ignoble prizes?
I don't like where this is going.
Prizes. You know the Nobel Prizes, right?
Yes.
I do. Yes.
Okay. Well, apparently 32 years ago, they started something called the ignoble prizes. And they were recently announced, this year's winners, on September 15th. And these are awards given out by the Annals of Improbable Research. Apparently that's like a journal or a magazine or something. And here's the premise of the awards is these honor hilarious scientific achievements. And the prizes are not just for laughs. They may make us giggle, but the ignoble prizes, this is a quote, draws attention to the relevance that even seemingly bizarre research can have.
Well, now, it seems like a lot of the news of the butt that Phil brings in is from research that probably should qualify for these categories.
You might think so, but they have a lot of different categories of prizes, and I thought it'd be fun to just talk about some of them and share what the winners were for this year. This is there's a lot of different intersecting pieces here, like science news, animal news, things like that.
Could it be a guessing game?
Yeah. How about this? I will tell you the winner, and you tell me what the category was.
Oh, like that.
Does that sound good? Okay, here's the first one. Researchers from Leiden University in the Netherlands found that the heart rates of potential romantic partners synchronize when they first meet, but only if they feel attracted to one another. Come on, you're stunned by silence.
I'm trying to understand exactly what that means. Does that mean that, just two random people meet and they could be potential partners, and so if they are attracted to each other, their heart rates will synchronize?
I believe that's what it means. Yes. And
And
I there's nothing more given. So I don't know if this is human romantic partners or they're talking about some animal.
Sounds like it.
It does sound like it. So any guesses on what the category was?
Love.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
Oh, no, this is a scientific journal.
Love.
It's applied cardiology.
Applied cardiology.
Well, okay.
Okay. How about this one? Scientists from the Chiba Institute of Technology in Japan won a prize when they discovered that larger doorknobs require more fingers to turn.
How did they not already know that?
I don't know. But somebody funded a research project determining that...
Obvious science.
Is that your
That's
category?
the category.
Hold on, let me try. The category is human anatomy.
It was just flat out engineering.
Okay.
I really have some questions about what led someone to pose the question, is that true? Should we test it? When it seems
I think
obviously true.
It seems like a 3-year-old knows this.
Yes.
Especially with little hands. Okay, next one. Duckling formations conserve energy by surfing their mother's wake, according to an unrelated pair of studies that included researchers from Westchester University in Pennsylvania and Zhengzhou University of Science and Technology in China. So, and a third one, University of Strathclyde in the UK. So 3 different universities in 3 different continents all studied this and were awarded this because ducklings will actually surf their mother's wake to minimize resistance in the water.
Okay, I don't want to guess the category here because I just want to know why. Why are we wasting money studying this? What use is it? How does this help our world?
I like that 3 different groups of people, of scientists, were all interested in baby animals at the same time. I just think that's sweet.
Okay, well,
all a matter of perspective, Caitlin. I'm with you now.
okay, I'm with both of you here because on one level it's adorable. On another level, it's pretty obvious because like when you see ducklings following their mother, they're often like in a V formation, which is very similar to birds in the air because it's all about wind or water resistance and makes kind of sense. Okay, a couple more and then we'll move on.
Wait, what was the category?
Physics.
Oh.
Just physics.
I thought these categories were going to be more interesting, to be honest.
I know. They're not. Okay, this year's award for this other category was granted for the development of a crash test moose dummy made of readily available parts, which were designed for a master's thesis at the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. So somebody built a giant moose dummy for crash testing cars.
Okay.
Which seems like it would be useful in Sweden, right?
Yeah.
I'll just tell you, this was safety engineering because I want to get to the last 2 categories.
Of course.
Okay.
I'm waiting.
One is art history.
Oh, very highbrow, Sky.
Very highbrow. Are you ready?
No.
Enema scenes in ancient Mayan pottery suggest ritual intoxication via the rectum. A pair of researchers from the Royal Dutch Society of the Advancement of Pharmacy and the Foundation of Latin American Anthropological Research found that the ancient Mayans used to get drunk through boothing.
And I thought we were going to escape the butt news today, and clearly I was wrong.
No.
I feel like a 12-year-old boy commissioned that study.
Wow.
What is the category?
That 12-year-old boy's at the Royal Dutch Society of the Advancement of Pharmacy. And
maybe. There's some real geniuses, and we shouldn't let them.
This is art history?
This is art history. Apparently, there's some ancient Mayan pottery that shows scenes of enemas and intoxication. So there you go. Okay, last one. Biology.
Not good.
Male scorpions have the ability to self-amputate the end of their tails. Did you know about this?
No.
Why?
Well, like some lizards and other species where their tail can be, if they're caught by a predator, their tail can be detached and they can keep, they survive that and they keep going.
Okay.
Well, male scorpions can do this as well. The end of their tails can be amputated and that's fine. But the problem is the end of their tail includes their anus. And when the tail regenerates, it can grow back, but it never regrows an anus.
I love the way you say that, Sky.
Okay.
Makes me super uncomfortable.
This is what I know. This is what the researchers found is that this eventually causes the scorpions to become slower. They can't run as quickly because they are forever then perpetually constipated. and they eventually die from this constipation.
Well, of course.
But this is the crazy part. Researchers, a pair from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, discovered that the animals are still able to move fast enough to likely score a mate before they die from constipation. Come on, I think that's pretty amazing.
Well, the one question I have is, if they lose that part of their body, isn't that where their stinger lies? And if they don't have their stinger or their anus, like you were saying,
yes, nuss.
then can't they die because they no longer can defend themselves as well?
That's probably a factor as well. But apparently, they still have what it takes to,
to get it on.
Okay. Well, this has been the Ignoble Awards
my
for
gosh.
2022. Thanks
or
for joining
otherwise
us.
known as and disguised as News of the Butt.
Yeah, but we can't call it that because that's like Phil's thing. We can call it something else. Maybe it's posterior posts or dispatches from the derriere or something like that. But it can't be News of the Butt because it just can't be. Okay, next story. A Texas judge took religious freedom too far. At least that's the opinion of Noah Feldman, who wrote this piece. This is an interesting story. It came out last week. A federal district court held that a Christian employer is entitled to an exemption from the requirement that all insurance plans must cover pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP. I don't know if it's called PrEP or pre-P drugs that prevent the spread of HIV. So there's a category of drugs that people can take to prevent gaining the infection of HIV. And they're called PrEP drugs, prophylaxis. This ruling basically says that because the Christian employer doesn't want to provide these drugs to their employees, they don't have to. If upheld by the appellate court and the Supreme Court, the Texas ruling would exempt an employer who refused to provide any healthcare coverage of any kind on the ground that medical insurance encourages people to rely on medical science, not religious faith, in planning their lives. A few other details before we get in. The ruling by the Texas court was predicated on a ruling by Justice Alito in 2020 involving the Little Sisters of the Poor. Do you remember them? Mm-hmm. So in that case, the nuns objected on religious liberty grounds to the exemption from providing contraceptive insurance that Health and Human Services was already providing. Alito wrote that if an employer, quote, has a sincere religious belief that compliance with the law makes it complicit in conduct it rejects. So in this case, like the Little Sisters of the Poor object to contraception. They object, obviously, to abortion. They didn't want to have to provide that, nor did they want to have to provide the funding for someone to go get it elsewhere. And Justice Alito in the Supreme Court said, yeah, you don't, if it violates your sincerely held religious beliefs, you don't have to do it. Well, in this Texas case, it's a little bit different because what this employer is saying is that the giving people these drugs that would prevent them from getting AIDS could result in them engaging in more promiscuous sexual behavior or sexual activity outside of marriage or same-sex sexual activity, which are all things that they believe violate their faith, and therefore they shouldn't have to provide these insurance that covers these drugs. So the question is, though, is it wrong for Christians or Christian employers to have to provide something if it could result in behavior you don't support, rather than it certainly will result in behavior you don't support? Does that make sense? What do you guys think?
Well, Caitlin, I'll let you go. Give your thoughts.
This reminded me of when I was like a young teenager. There was a bit of like a hullabaloo over a vaccine that would prevent people from getting HPV, and that could prevent getting cervical cancer. And I remember in the church that I was in, there was a whole thing about similar argument, like, don't let your girls, your teenage girls, get this vaccine because then they'll feel free to have sex whenever and whatever. And I remember like being in a church where like, yeah, we all felt very strongly like, yeah, this is really bad. And I would never need it. So why would I go get it? I shouldn't go get it. And I remember later, like in college, having a conversation with a friend who was like, well, what if you marry someone who, you know, had a very different life and could expose you to different things? Or what if really horrifically you're sexually assaulted? Or are there other situations where it might be useful to have this? And I had never considered that because I was in a context where it just seemed so obvious and important that we be against this thing. And I think there's something similar going on here where on one hand, there's a lack of real thought about other situations where this might be useful. Again, someone could be in a marriage and having sex within a context that this organization would approve of, and there could be reason for them to want to prevent themselves from getting HIV from their spouse. There could be situations where they're sexually assaulted. There could be, you don't know what kind of context could occur where this could be within the bounds of the sexual ethics of the organization, and this could make sense. But I think the larger problem is, yes, there have been changes in medical advancements that have changed the way we think about sexuality. The, easy availability of contraceptives and access to abortion did change the calculus for people when they were thinking about what sex was and their sexuality. But that wasn't the only thing. I think this is another example of Christians thinking that rules or legal rulings shape much more than maybe they do, in the sense that, yes, those medical advancements made changes in sexuality, but accompanied with that was a really strong narrative about what sex was and what's valuable in life and how to live your life in a way that's satisfying. And I just wish that we were not attacking in kind of a war sense, but we were responding to those kinds of really powerful stories with an alternate story about what is valuable and good in a human life and in a human community, instead of thinking that we'll stave off those cultural changes by making stricter rules about what kind of medicines people can take or what kind of medical advancements they can take advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds so legalistic and unloving, and it also sounds like we as Christians want to impose our morality on everyone else, which really does make people angry, upset, or hurt instead of feeling cared about. So in this instance, they are thinking that if they give this, vaccine, that they're encouraging the possibility of, relationships that they don't approve of. But at the same token, wouldn't they want to care about protecting people from something that could actually kill them? Or impact their family? Where is that in the conversation when you're talking about a Christian community or Christian employer? I just feel like we're so short-sighted when we think about the whole issue, and we get so caught up on that legalistic aspect that we forget the real-world implications with real-world humans.
Totally. Yeah. There's two things that stick with me, though, about this whole issue. One is these kinds of ethical dilemmas are going to keep coming up as long as we are relying on employers for our health care. Because if you move from one employer to the next and they have different ethical beliefs, then your health insurance coverage changes based on who hires you. And it's really weird. It's kind of bizarre. But then the other thing is, how far removed from something do you have to be before you are ethically no longer responsible? So, for example, if as a Christian employer or say a Roman Catholic employer, the medical insurance I'm providing for my employees offers contraception or even abortion, you can make an argument that, well, because you are directly paying for that, and contraception prevents pregnancy and abortion ends a pregnancy. Those are direct results of those drugs or procedures. You can feel moral culpability for paying for those things, and you don't want to do that. But in this case, you have making a drug available that someone may choose to take in order to prevent getting a disease. It's not guaranteed that drug is going to necessarily be used in an inherently immoral context. Whereas some Christians believe that abortion, no matter how or when it is done, is inherently immoral. But getting an HPV vaccine or taking this preventative drug, that's not inherently in and of itself immoral. They're just saying it could lead to immoral behavior. So how far removed does it have to be before you can say, I am not morally responsible as an employer for paying for something because I don't know how my employee is going to use it? It's like saying, do you provide alcohol because somebody might become intoxicated and do something bad with it when others may use it responsibly and not do anything bad with it? Is it just inherently wrong to ever provide alcohol to somebody? This just seems kind of bonkers. And I think the point of the article was, hey, if this stands, anybody who has any religious conviction can come up with any excuse to not provide whatever they don't want to for their. He makes a point later in the article that someone could simply say, hey, I don't want to provide health insurance at all because that would encourage my employees to trust in medical science rather than just prayer for healthcare.
Well, and one of the things that I read in that article was even more frightening, and that was that you didn't have to offer any facts to substantiate your serious feeling or belief. And that just is so, for me, egregious. You just say, I feel strongly about this and therefore I shouldn't have to do it. That opens a whole can of worms, Pandora's box, whatever you want to call it, for so many different things. And once it's law, it's case law and it can be used to make arguments in other cases. So,
yeah, it seems like something that's going on throughout our political discourse and our society in general, where it doesn't matter if you have any facts to back up your claim. It's just, I feel strongly, this has been a big deal around the 2020 election, stop the steal stuff. It's like, well, where's the proof? A lot of people going, well, I really feel, because there's no way Biden could have legitimately won. Now, thankfully, that doesn't hold up in court. But when it comes to the First Amendment, it could, because the courts can't legislate or rule on doctrine and religious belief. All they can determine is does somebody sincerely believe it or not. And if you claim you sincerely believe it, that's all it takes.
Well, that's the whole fight we're having with a lot of vaccine exemptions right now, is people just saying, well, that's a sincerely held belief I have. And people are like, well, there's no church that has an official doctrine on that, but people will say that I also think that this example, I think it's another example of how a lot of particularly evangelical, but I think many Christians in the United States, all people, out of a desire for control, I think, have a really hard time acknowledging that many ethical questions are deeply contextual. And we think that to say that is to say that they're totally relative, instead of to say, no, we're always making really hard decisions in the heat of the moment with different, consequences and different motivations and different. So to just kind of make a hard and fast rule that like, no, this drug is unacceptable because of my sexual ethic, is to just make it more easy than it possibly could be. And we do that with so many things. But then when you find a way to make that policy for other people who aren't even you, it's even more dangerous. Instead, it's like there's a fear of just letting people make those really hard decisions in the context of their own lives and with the guidance of the Holy Spirit and with their communities help it. It's like, I need to have control over those decisions, instead of recognizing that that's not usually how they're made or how they should be made.
Yeah, and I'm sympathetic to the claim when it comes to things like abortion or certain contraceptions that prevent implantation, things like that, because you can make a moral claim that there's another life, another person involved in all this. But like, what happens when a business owner who's a devout Jehovah's Witness says, I no longer want to pay for blood transfusion coverage for my workers because as a Jehovah's Witness, I don't believe in blood transfusions. Like, that's a life and death situation for some of those employers, that an owner is imposing their religious convictions on people who don't share them. And there's just something really weird about all of this. And does it eventually push us to the place of realizing, okay, this employer-based healthcare idea just is too burdened with baggage to continue, and we need a simpler system. But there's a lot of resistance on that side, too.
Yeah.
Okay, next story from Texas. So last year, a new law went into effect in Texas requiring schools to display a, quote, durable poster or framed copy of the United States national motto, "In God We Trust," if it's donated. So
wait, I missed that part.
Yeah, this is interesting.
If it is donated, they have to do it. But if it's not donated, they don't have to do it.
Right. So I think my understanding, reading between the lines here, is Texas passed a law saying we want schools to display the national motto, "In God We Trust." But schools or others were like, yeah, but we don't want to have to pay for that. So then they said, well, if somebody donates that to you, you have to display it. Okay. Now, the law also has some pretty strict limits on what the poster or sign can show. So the law says the poster, quote, must contain a representation of the United States flag centered under the national motto and a representation of the state flag. And it may not depict any words, images, or other information other than the representations listed in subdivision 1. That's the flags and the motto. So that's it. It's all it can have on it. Okay. Well, there's a group called Patriot Mobile, which sounds like a cellular plan, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. but it's not apparently. It's a self-described conservative Christian business, and it has donated these signs to schools all over Texas. The problem is the signs apparently have 2 Texas flags and dozens of stars in the background, which some people are claiming is a violation of the strict law that says you can't have anything other than the American flag, the Texas flag, the motto, nothing else. But here's the really interesting part. Patriot Mobile says that it has delivered almost 1,000 of these signs to districts all over Texas as part of its movement to, quote, bring God back into public schools. Okay. You guys, can you predict any problems that this may cause? Any guesses on how people are going to respond to this?
Well, it is Texas, so
But yeah, that's true.
are they unified in their mindset? But what's interesting is it's not just the company Patriot Mobile wanting to put God back into schools. There was the previous law that said, these signs can be displayed that, says in God we trust. And I think that law was passed with the same intention, to put God back in schools. And so interestingly enough, though, it does sound like there were parents that did take a little bit of umbrage with this in Texas. So what'd they do?
Okay, so there's a group of parents who filed lawsuits wanting to end this law as unconstitutional. One of them, Savran Krishna, who sounds like a South Asian American, decided to donate signs to schools as well that abide by the rules of the regulation. So he donated signs that had "In God We Trust" written, but in Arabic.
Smart.
Rather than English, and another one that had rainbow colors as the background, because the ones that Patriot Mobile had dedicated or donated had stars in the background, which technically was a violation of things. So he's like, well, if you can have stars, why can't you have rainbows? Right? It's another...
Excellent questions.
Right? So, of course, those signs were flat out rejected, even though they abided no differently to the law than the Patriot Mobile ones. And it's a little bit like, what's that group? The Satanic Church or the Church of Satan or whatever they are, who would like put up public displays of bath mats and things like satanic symbols, because they say, hey, if people can put up 10 Commandments and nativity scenes and stuff like that, then we should be able to put our stuff up as well. And that's what these parents are doing. It's like, okay, if you're going to keep these obviously religious signs up, we're going to put signs up too. But people are freaking out that it's in Arabic or it has a rainbow symbol. So whose side are you on here? Are you on the side of the parents putting up the Arabic and rainbow signs? Are you on the side of Patriot Mobile? What's it? And let me just say this, like, strictly speaking, like right now on every bit of currency in our pockets, it says "In God We Trust," right? So it isn't like this is and it is one of we have 2 national mottos. "In God We Trust" came about much later in the 1950s, but it is one of our national mottos. So strictly speaking, it's hard to object to like displaying that, but you're right, Christian, like the total intent behind this in Texas and explicitly in their agenda saying, hey, we want to get God back in our schools.
But what I think is so silly is this ties in with the story before, which is this legalistic idea that you do this thing and it brings God into the public life. And that's just silly because, putting something "In God We Trust" on our money or in our schools is not going to, quote unquote, bring God back into schools. It's not going to save people or draw them to Christ or anything like that. Could possibly do the opposite. So it really isn't achieving the real goal, which I think Christians would say is, wouldn't it be lovely if we had more Christ-like behavior in our schools, or that we would encourage others to come to Christ in our, groups or whatever. So it just seems to me it's a lot of legalism and gamesmanship over something that's trying to divide instead of unify.
Yeah, this definitely falls under the category of how stupid do you think God is? Like, do you really think God is looking down at some elementary school in North Texas and he's going, I'm not going to bless those people? And then someone puts up the sign that says "In God We Trust," and God goes, oh, they've warmed my heart. I'm going to like, how stupid do you think God is? Like that, it feels almost pagan. Like you just do these rituals or you say these words like incantations and it forces God's blessing and glory to come. I'm kind of embarrassed by it in general, but I don't understand why so many Christians think this way. And
not just how stupid, but like like you said, how limited. Like every time I hear like bring God back in public schools, it's kind of funny because all of my education as a child was in public schools, and it was all in public schools post, quote unquote, taking God out in terms of not having prayer or having Bible teaching or any of those things.
And look at you, Caitlin. You think you're a female theologian and you're at Duke.
You're right. It's a very good point against us. But but seriously, like I went to a Bible study that met in the afternoon in my public high school. We couldn't do it part of class. We couldn't our teacher, who was the faculty sponsor of it, could not openly evangelize to students. But the fact that we put more effort in than would have been required if it was just a school sponsored thing, how much more evangelistic was it to have a bunch of students in that school who weren't just saying hey, when we all collectively, bow our heads for this prayer we're all forced to do, I really mean it. No, it was much more evangelistic for us to be I stay after for an hour to go to Bible study because I truly believe that this wild story about a man who was crucified and then rose from the dead, and I'm willing to put some effort into learning about him and talking, that was so much more meaningful. And there's all kind of fraught ways that we've done that, right? There's ways that even post those changes in public schools, we've done a bad job of evangelizing in them. And I'm sure teenage me said a lot of silly things to my classmates in pursuit of it. But the idea that God was ever out of public schools, that we need to bring God back in, is to limit God and to be confused about what happens in play. I mean, the fact it really exemplifies a lack of knowledge of our history to say that if we can't have public presentations of the gospel, or we can't have signs that say God bless America, or any of those kinds of weird mashups of patriotic and religious things, that the faith won't grow, is to ignore all of the history of the faith that grew in lots of persecuted places where those kinds of things would not have only been not allowed, but completely unimaginable.
Okay.
And a lack of imagination on our part about what that could look like in the future.
Yeah. So what you're identifying is our ignorance about history. Christian, you've identified our ignorance about theology and how God really operates. But then there's this other ignorance, which is we've been down this road numerous times now, where Christians have advocated for some pro-Christian thing in the public sector or public schools. And they forget that every time you do that, you open the door to every other religious expression.
I was just going to say that. My husband told me that long ago, when I was fighting for prayer in schools. He said, well, what prayer are you fighting for? Don't you realize that if we passed this law that every, prayer could be said in schools, are you okay with, every single prayer? And that's sort of what reminded me when they put the "In God We Trust" sign up in Arabic. I mean, why isn't that okay?
Right. Because it looks Islamic. That's why. This is not long ago. There was a case in Boston where it was City Hall somewhere where they had a flagpole where they were inviting different groups to put their flag. You could request that your group's flag be put on there for a day or a week or something or other. And all kinds of different groups did it. And then a Christian group did it. And they said, no, because you're religious. And I think it went to the Supreme Court. And they eventually said, no, if you're going to open it up to one kind of group, it has to be open to all groups. And now I think they've decided we're not going to do that at all. So there's a case where it was the opposite, where the discrimination was against the Christian group and it was okay for other groups. And in a place like Texas, it's well, we want the Christian expression visible, but we don't want any other expression visible. We have been down this road so many times in so many different ways, whether it's flags or signs or prayers or whatever it is. And I just don't understand why it's so difficult for people to recognize we live in a pluralistic society. There's a great diversity of beliefs and cultures and backgrounds, and you can't just have it your way without inviting or allowing others to also express theirs. But we keep making this mistake over and over and over again. And I don't know why. Maybe
I think it's part of that mindset that we grew up with. Well, I should say I grew up with in this little Southern Baptist church where we had this mandate to evangelize the world. And we think it's our responsibility to take our Christian religion, share it with everybody so that the entire world, sees Christianity as the saving grace of our world and adopts that. And so now we're in this fighting mode where we have to push all of that, and that does have to be primary if, people are going to be with Christ, if our world is going to be saved. I mean, pick your dream. But I think that's the genesis of where it comes from. I mean, what do you think, Caitlin? You know better than me about that.
Well, I was thinking while you were talking, Christian, that description is so perfect of what Sky said earlier of this wasn't a national, not national anthem, national motto until the 50s. A lot of those things when it comes to our money and when it comes to public adding "In God We Trust" to the Pledge of Allegiance, all of those kinds of things in the Cold War era, as you've described, Christian, like not just a evangelize in the sense of, I believe that this is true about the world and I care about the eternal destinies and the material well-being in the future of people in the world. And so I want to tell them the truth of the gospel. It moves to the gospel is intertwined with America's destiny in the world. And so we have to have public symbols of it. And we have to, and then you get into the military future of America and the military strength of America and the economic strength of America are all tied into our ability to evangelize and to evangelize America's strengths. And all of that gets all, twisted up with each other. That's when people my age, I feel are much less likely. If I put a sign up in my home, if I had when you came into my home a sign that said "God bless America" or "In God We Trust," that shuts down the conversation immediately. There's no way that that symbol that was intended to rally people together into a community of we as a nation share a religion and we share a destiny economically and a destiny militarily, and we need to fight the kind of godless communists in the world. And that common identity will be very helpful in rallying people towards this military mission is now something that has pushed people away from Christianity to the point where, again, it's about context. Even the people who are pushing in this school to have that symbol, I hope if I believe the best of them and I want to, they want it because they believe it's true and they believe people should know about Jesus, and they don't recognize that because the context has changed, that message means something different now and will push more people away than it will bring them to Jesus.
Okay, last point on this story. There is a season of the year in America, it's about at least 2 months, in some cases longer, where our entire society realigns itself around deeply Christian symbols. Secular radio stations literally play Christian hymns for 2 months in this country. We redecorate our homes and public spaces around a Christian symbol. We have images of Jesus all over the place. We say Merry Christmas for multiple years. The entire economy has been realigned around the Christian calendar to celebrate a Christian holiday. Everything about American society is fixated on Christian symbols for a good chunk of the year. And I would argue that has not in any way made us more Christian. If anything, it has made us more materialistic, self-centered, and ungodly. So this idea that if we just use Christian symbols more, it's going to make everything better has been disproven from 150 years of the Christmas holiday being materialized in America. And if we keep putting these symbols in places, it's going to make them more American, not America more Christian.
Yes.
Sorry, Sky. I didn't.
No.
I thought you were done. I actually have talked to a couple of people who get enraged at Christmas time, who are not Christians. They are of different faith. And they are subjected to listening to this music for 4 to 6 weeks all the time and having it just shoved in their face. And all it does is cause them to realize they're a minority group that's not respected. So I agree with you 100%. I think that we are completely missing the point if we think that those symbols and forcing people to do things our way are the way of Christ. We got another think coming.
Okay, last story before our interview today. This has been big in the news all week, and it's not about Texas. It's more about Florida, but the governor of Texas is involved in this as well. Our friend Jonathan Merritt over at Religion News has written a piece called "Southern Governors Sending Migrants North Face a Crisis of Faith." So I'm sure you guys heard about some of this. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis sent 2 plane loads of migrants to Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts on Wednesday, September 14th, to protest a rise in illegal immigration. Each plane carried about 50 immigrants, including children who appear to have mostly come from Venezuela and Colombia, 2 South American countries experiencing severe economic and political turmoil. After the planes unexpectedly landed on the island, many of the passengers said they had been misled, claiming they thought they were being sent to Boston, where they would be provided with help, attaining work permits, and English language lessons. DeSantis seems to think Martha's Vineyard would be a better place to own the libs. So some things are not being communicated super clearly in the media about this, but my understanding is that these people volunteered to take this trip, but many of them assumed, I don't know if it was a deliberate deception or just poor communication. You're dealing with people who don't speak English for the most part. They thought they were going to Boston, a much larger urban area where there's more resources and opportunities, but instead they were sent to Martha's Vineyard, this Northeast vacation paradise. And it was DeSantis's way of basically saying, we're sick of taking all these migrants down here in the southern states, and we're going to send them north where you people have to deal with them. DeSantis is not the only politician to send migrants afar to curry favor with his party. The Republican governors of Arizona and Texas have bused more than 13,000 migrants and asylum seekers to Chicago, New York, and Washington. Helpless passengers are dropped off with little to no instruction about what to do next or how to attain food and shelter. Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Arizona Governor Doug Ducey are also self-avowed Christians. What do you guys make of this? Like, what's your first, when you heard this story, what was your gut reaction?
Okay, I'm worried to tell you mine because it's not really politically correct. But when I heard this story, I thought, oh my goodness, those migrants are going to be so thankful. Like, they're going to be so blessed because they're going to end up in this place where people actually care about them and will probably provide things for them. And that is exactly what happened. And my husband and I were talking about this, and he says, this is absolutely using other people, and it isn't right. It's basically trafficking people. And I started thinking about it from their point of view. It got even worse when I heard that they were lied to. And I watched an interview where these migrants were talking about this woman. I don't know if her name was Paula or she had a specific name, where she would go around and ask the migrants if they wanted, to go on this flight, to go find a new job and to, find people that would help them. And she was basically luring them in to this political stunt. And so when I heard that, I thought how horrible that was to deceive people like that, to think that they were going to get something that they were promised, only to be dumped off in a place where nobody knew that they were coming. And, I think it would be one thing if the governors that wanted to, kind of spread the migrants around were calling other governors in other states and said, look, we want to collaborate with you. Our borders are flooded. We'd like to send some migrants, by plane or bus to your location so you can help care for these. And there was an agreement and arrangement worked out. That's one thing. And I can understand distributing that care for these migrants coming in across 50 states. I mean, that seems reasonable. I don't know, if you think that, but it seems more reasonable than what they're doing than just dumping them off.
Do you remember when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans and the Gulf Coast down there and lots of people fled? They were essentially refugees within the United States from their own areas. And states all over the country, including up here in Illinois, opened up and resettled them and figured out, like, there was a real mobilization of the whole country to help one another in that crisis. Of course, we're talking about people who are coming from outside the United States. But yeah, your point's a good one, Christian. Like, this burden is disproportionately upon the border states,
yes,
for sure.
And I feel bad about that.
Right. But is this the right way to try to handle it? I mean, it is clearly a stunt because a few dozen migrants is not going to alleviate the problem that Florida's facing or Texas or whatever. Even a couple thousand is not really going to solve the problem. So it's clearly done for political showmanship. But first of all, I felt sick that these people were being used in a stunt. Like, that just is nauseating. And yeah. So Caitlin, you're shaking your head.
Yeah. Human beings are never tools for your political project. Like, that should be a foundational thing across parties, especially for Christians. That does not honor the image of God made in other human beings, regardless of what country they're from or what burden they are placing on your economy or your communities. And I think, interestingly enough, this the passage that just came to mind for me ties in all of these stories. One of the passages that I heard taught a lot when I was a kid when it came to sexual ethics was the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the two cities that are judged in Genesis. And the description often was homosexuality. That was the sin that caused their judgment, right? So some of those kinds of things are the things that animate the sort of sexual ethics that say, my company can't provide this medicine that could prevent you from getting HIV because this is the level of judgment that God takes on sexual behavior that is against his will. In Ezekiel, it's really clear what the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was, and it's the sin that most frequently in the Old Testament is described against people, against nations that are not Israel, which is how you treat foreigners and how you treat the poor. So the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, even in Genesis, it's clear that how they're being judged in the context of that story is how they treat foreigners. They're trying to sexually assault these foreigners. And then Ezekiel makes clear that they weren't even taking care of the poor in their own city. So and then the way that this ties into the second story, we love making comparisons to Israel and America. We love saying that God will take care of us, God bless us, God have mercy on us. Scripture is clear, first of all, especially if we are not Israel, which, newsflash, we are not. The most common thing that nations that are not Israel are judged for in the Old Testament is how they treat foreigners. They're not judged for keeping Israel's law. It wasn't given to them. It's not required of them. America will not be judged for not keeping Israel's law or for not acting sufficiently Christian because it's not supposed to. But the thing that is incredibly clear in Scripture is that nations are judged by how they treat foreigners and how they treat the vulnerable. And if we were serious about wanting to trust God to put that on our public buildings, if we trust what God says to us about himself, we should be terrified of the judgment that is coming on us for how we mistreat foreigners. And that would display more Christian nationhood than anything else. But we don't want to do that. We want to put symbols in place instead of recognizing that if God really is who he says he is, then we should be not saying in God we trust. We should be saying, God, have mercy on us.
Yeah,
Preach
totally.
it, sister.
Amen.
Mic drop.
I think one of the things that's disturbing about this whole trend is whether it's DeSantis or Abbott or whoever else is governors that are doing this is none of this is going to solve the problem. It is truly a stunt. And towards your point, Caitlin, this is what the Catholic Archbishop of Miami said in response, quote, "Immigration is not just a political issue, but a fundamental human and moral issue. For the immigrants are not faceless numbers, but human persons. They are our brothers and sisters. Justice and prudence demand that we treat them with dignity and find a reasonable way for their contributions and presence to be recognized within the law." There it is.
Yeah.
But okay, so here's the problem, though. Two things can be true at the same time. On the one hand, we do have an immigration crisis, and that is being felt most acutely on the border states in the South. That is true. The other thing that can be true at the same time is sending plane loads or bus loads of immigrants and migrants or refugees to northern cities is immoral. It's a political stunt that is wrong. So just because what's happening on the southern border is wrong shouldn't justify what some of these governors are doing, which is also wrong. And here's the part that kind of really bugs me the most. Why do we have a crisis on the southern border? I mean, at the end of the... Go ahead.
Well, because other countries are in complete and total chaos and turmoil that people are looking for help.
That is certainly a huge piece of this.
We don't have efficient pathways to legal migration.
Right. So since the George W. Bush administration, there have been attempts at comprehensive immigration reform. A number of those attempts have also included a lot of funding to secure the southern border, the famous build the wall kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Back in 2018 was the last time there was a concerted effort to try to come up with a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Do you remember who was president in 2018?
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump was president. He and his administration struck a deal with a bunch of leaders in Congress for comprehensive immigration reform that included securing the southern border and creating a pathway to citizenship for the dreamers, right? The kids who were brought here when they were young. Why didn't that happen? Because 14 Republican senators voted against Donald Trump's compromised bill. So here's the part that gets me, including Ted Cruz from Texas, including Kennedy from Louisiana, including a bunch of other southern Republican senators. So here you have these southern states saying, hey, it's not fair that we're getting tens of thousands of immigrants into our cities and towns that are, stretching our resources. And the northern cities are saying, well, we're sanctuary cities. We'd welcome them. We're not racist, and accusing the South of being racist. And then the South says, fine, here they are, and sends them up north. And then is trying to own the libs with it when it's their own senators that have refused the solutions that have presented themselves that could have secured the southern border and made pathways for legal immigration more navigable. So that's the part that I just find boggling. It isn't like it's senators from Illinois and Massachusetts that are blocking immigration reform. It's their own senators who are blocking it and keeping the crisis going. So if you really want to solve the problem in your state, Florida or Texas or Arizona, elect senators that believe in immigration reform, because it's a federal issue that needs to be solved. It can't be solved in your state house. It's not going to be solved by sending a couple dozen of them to Martha's Vineyard.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little ugly truth, which is a big generalization, I'm sure. I will admit that, and I'm not sure that it's true everywhere. But I do know I spend a lot of time in the South. I spend a lot of time around white people, and there is a general attitude that if we continue to let these people in, our white race as we know it will be gone. We will be diluted. Our religion will be diluted. The place where we lived and grew up is no longer going to exist anymore. And we're not even going to speak English anymore. And so they're so afraid that everything that they know and who they are as their culture is going to be washed away and taken over by brown people, that anybody that says on the political front, I will make sure that, our borders are controlled and that we've reduced the number of immigrants, is going to get elected in the southern states by white evangelical Christians.
Well, maybe that's the case, Christian, but what I find perplexing is some of these proposals have said exactly that. We are going to secure the southern border. We will fund it. We will stop this, unstoppable flow of undocumented immigrants. But it's also said we're going to create a pathway of citizenship for those who are already here. And we're going to make large allowances of legal immigration. But that also has not been received. So that's what I'm perplexed about.
It's like so many things, though. It's kind of like this is often true of abortion, where it's like on one hand, there are solutions that could give you something that you want, but it's more politically profitable. Like if you're a career politician who wants to get elected for the rest of your life, it actually doesn't serve you all the time for those solutions, for like actual solutions to happen. But as Christian's really wonderfully described, like that kind of fear and drawing on people's really deeply held sense of loyalty to an imagined community and what that means to them and their family, all of that is so politically powerful that once you sign the bill, and if anything starts to improve, and you don't get to put a bunch of immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, you don't get to do the stunt that, honestly, that stunt was for the base, right? If you don't get to do that stuff anymore, it doesn't serve your political futures. It's less, which is its own, there's parallels on both sides of the aisle and in lots of different issues, but if it's really politically powerful for you to get to say that you're against something, but not actually do anything about it, then you'll keep not doing anything about it.
I think that's a factor here. And
yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Christian.
No, I just want to say, this sort of gets under my ire, and it's sort of, we kind of moved away from this really. This whole article that Jonathan Merritt wrote was all about these governors who are Christians who are acting this way and treating other humans this way. And I think that's the part that we forget, because as we know, it is the white evangelical Christians, for the most part, that are electing these governors or the past president. And we're the ones. We're the ones that are responsible for this behavior. We're the ones who are supporting these candidates that are doing these political stunts. It has to change with us as Christians, or with this evangelical base or community that we have. And I don't understand what's broken within our tribe that can't see how unloving it is and un-Christ-like it is to treat other people that way. If we are living what we say we believe, then we are for the foreigners. We are for the immigrants. We are to interact in the public square in a way that brings honor to God, not people pointing fingers. It boggles my mind how people that profess to be followers of Christ continue to treat other people that are the others, like trash.
Yeah. To wrap this up, like I said before, I think there is a legitimate concern here. If I were a resident on the southern border in a southern state, and we're seeing tens of thousands of people come in every year to my community and stretching our resources, if that would be of great concern, because again, two things can be true at the same time. You can, in a Christian way, like you're saying, Christian, really want to welcome people and care for them, and also realize we don't have enough resources to do this well. And so I feel some empathy for people in those communities, and they're not all white people. There are a lot of Hispanic people in Texas and Arizona and Florida. Like, this is not a race thing necessarily. This is a 50-state issue. This is an American issue, and we need an American solution to this where we all share the burden of welcoming and caring for these people. And we also share the responsibility to change our immigration policy, to secure the border, to figure out a hospitable, human, dignifying way of handling immigration in this country. But my beef with all of this is, like you said, Caitlin, there's a lot of people who are benefiting from this crisis politically. Governors and senators who say they want to solve it, but when they given the opportunity, they don't. Let's just end with a little silver lining on this story. Jonathan Merritt ends talking about St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Martha's Vineyard, whose pastor is Vincent Seedale. And he says that the church houses homeless people during the winter months. And the pastor was at a conference in North Carolina on Wednesday when all the parishioners called him to inform him about the situation of these migrant workers who were landing in Martha's Vineyard. Seedale gave permission for his parishioners to offer the immigrants food, a place to sleep, and a play area for the children. Volunteers kept vigil overnight in case any unexpected needs arose. We're doing what churches are supposed to do and taking care of people as they show up, Seedale told the Washington Post. In contrast between St. Andrew's Episcopal and the Republican governors down south could not be starker. No one ever said being Christian was easy, but luckily some are still willing to do the work. And to add a little onto Jonathan Merritt's report, I know that there are really good, faithful Christians in Texas and Florida and Arizona and California and other states that are also doing this kind of really, really good work. They just get overshadowed by the political stunts that are going on all around. And whether Democrat or Republican, anyone who's using these immigrants and their situation for political exploitation, pox on both your houses, but we need a solution, and we need people who are serious enough to seek it rather than just play games. So, any final words?
Yeah, I just want to say, praise the Lord for those people in Martha's Vineyard. Because I think even though this was a political stunt, what happened was the highlight was on the Christian community that rose up to provide the needs for the strangers and foreigners in their land that they did not expect. And so in a sense, I think, Jesus won the day, and I just want to say hats off to you awesome people in Martha's Vineyard.
Amen. Okay, well, thank you guys for joining me. Thanks for listening. Thanks to our Patreon supporters. We're going to have a new episode of Christian Asks up this week because we just recorded some of those and Christian had some great questions. So if you're a Patreon supporter, you can look forward to getting that. And we will all look forward to having Phil back with us, rest and rejuvenated and, full of great insights and humor, as always. So till next week, stick around for the interview, which is coming in a minute, which I'm sure will be fantastic. And we'll see you guys next week.
Bye, everybody.
This episode is being sponsored by Abide. One of the best bits of parenting advice my wife and I ever got was someone who told us not to let your kid go to bed at night with a device in their room. They were absolutely correct. The problem is my wife and I have not always abided by that rule ourselves. Sometimes we take our phones to bed at night, or a tablet or a laptop or something, and then first thing in the morning, we're tempted to reach for our phones and begin the day on a screen. Shouldn't be surprised that we're all struggling with more stress and anxiety when that's how we begin and end our days. But there's a better way to do it. Abide is the #1 Christian meditation app. Abide users report less stress, lower levels of anxiety and depression, and they sleep better. You should start your day with Abide's daily meditation. Based on biblical passages, these audio meditations will center you and draw you closer to Christ. And for a limited time, our listeners are getting 25% off a premium subscription when you text Holy Post to 22433. Abide's meditations start at just 2 minutes long. That means they're super easy to fit into your schedule, and they feature topics like overcoming anxiety, managing stress, addiction and recovery, finding forgiveness, and more. And at the end of the day, you can find a deep rest with Abide's bedtime stories. Based on the Bible, they're great for kids and adults, the whole family. So join the millions of others who are using Abide to focus their minds and hearts on Christ. Get started now with 25% off a premium subscription by texting Holy Post to 22433. You'll get additional stories and meditations, premium music, soothing sounds, and more. Show your support for our show and get 25% off Abide by texting Holy Post to 22433. We are living in unprecedented times. I know that gets said a lot and sometimes it's hyperbolic, but in some ways it's actually true. Think about all the cultural and technological changes we've seen in just the last few decades. Social media, mobile technology, the pluralization of culture in the United States through immigration and the diversity of religious beliefs, the cultural and political polarization we're seeing. It's a lot to deal with, and it's raising a lot of anxiety and confusion for people. That's really the premise of Mark Sayers' new book, A Non-Anxious Presence: How a Changing and Complex World Will Create a Remnant of Renewed Christian Leaders. Mark Sayers is the senior leader of Red Church and the co-founder of Uber Ministries. He lives in Australia, but he's given a lot of insight into what's happening globally and particularly in Western cultures. And his new book deals with this rising anxiety and how it's affecting so much of what we're seeing in the world today. What I really love about this book is its explanatory power. It helps give language and framing to what we're experiencing, from the conflicts within our families, to the divisions in our congregations, to what we're seeing through the entire society. But he goes further to say that we're not equipped with our old ways of leadership to deal with this, which also explains why so many Christian leaders are failing or dropping out of ministry right now. Instead, he offers a different model, one that's based on psychological research, but also rooted in a deep mystical communion with God, who can bring us to a place of non-anxiety as we try to lead those who are riddled with it. This conversation is wide-ranging, and it just barely scratches the surface of the wisdom that's in this book. I cannot recommend it enough. Please pick it up. Again, it's called A Non-Anxious Presence. Here's my conversation with Mark Sayers. Mark Sayers, welcome to the Holy Post.
It's great to be here again.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. You have a new book out called A Non-Anxious Presence: How a Changing and Complex World Will Create a Remnant of Renewed Christian Leaders. That's a mouthful of a subtitle, but I think a non-anxious presence probably isn't going to communicate exactly what you want it to, but it is so central to the book. I read a lot of books for this podcast. I interview a lot of authors. We only have excellent authors and excellent books, but I have to say your book is a little different, because I wouldn't just say it's excellent. I would say it's really, really important. So let's start with this. You describe the current moment that we're in as a gray zone. Define what you mean by a gray zone.
So I think that often how we try and arrange human life is often in these epochs or eras. We're moving through time. We understand that people went before us and people will come after us. So we use as a descriptor eras. It's just been interesting in the last few days with the passing of Queen Elizabeth to hear people say it's the end of an era. It feels like an era has ended. And it's interesting that actually often, royals, how we used to, define things, the Edwardian age, the Elizabethan age, the Georgian age. And, that shows that there's actually an era where it's defined by a kind of maybe political power. It's defined by central ideas, central personalities. And that helps us understand, how we operate in that time. But with this book, I was sort of wondering, I had the sense that we were moving into something new, that a kind of era was coming to an end. And probably in the book, I talk about since the end of the Second World War, what I call the American century, which is a period that grew up in the wake of the World War II, and obviously the Allies winning, but particularly America being the dominant power, and how that shaped the world. It created a globalized world. But there was just a sense that particularly, I think over the last few years, that something was ending. And then with COVID, it just felt like a real bookend to the end of that period. And instead of like naming a new era, like I was sort of at beginning, like, what is the new era we're in? I came to the conclusion that we're not in a new era. We're actually in between two eras. The old era hasn't fully passed and the new era hasn't fully begun. So we're in this overlap between the two. So you see remnants of the old era, but then you see new and strange things. You see disappearances and appearances. And it's actually quite a confusing place to live. So I was hoping to narrate that for people, help people understand that. And just as hearing feedback from the book, I think that's an idea that's resonated with a lot of people. So
for
that's
sure.
it.
It's central to the premise of your book, though, is in this gray zone, this time between these eras where there's pieces of both and it's unformed. Central to your argument is that this creates a lot of anxiety, not just for individuals, but for whole systems and for whole societies. What is it specifically that you see as causing so much anxiety in the world right now?
Well, I think that in an era, the markers are clear. You know who's in control. You know what the dominant way of speaking and interacting with ideas is. You know where the power players are. And there's sort of a defined, often way of living and understanding and operating. It's like everyone's operating on iOS, or Windows or whatever. But in a grey zone, that all gets thrown up. There's multiple competing visions of what it is to live. So I think that brings a lot of anxiety. You see a clash of cultures, you see a clash of values, you see a clash of moralities, because power is draining from the former central powers. New ones are competing to try and sort of win the game of who's in control. So it's really hard to find a place to put your feet. And so it's much more defined by conflict, clashes, confusion, and that drives us to a sense of anxiety. And I think particularly for people who are invested in the last era, when that starts to disappear, that creates anxiety.
You talk about how our currently networked society, where the competing nodes of influence and power, caters to the most emotionally unhealthy people and creates emotionally unhealthy systems. How are you explain how you're applying Friedman's ideas of systems theory to what we're seeing right now in our society?
So I think as you outlined there, a lot of people understand Friedman as a systems theory thinker. So he applied that to families, and families are systems of relationships. And then what he did is brought that to congregations. So I think that's how most people understood it, that in a sense, congregations are also systems of relationships. But what I was initially interested in was how applying his analysis to culture. And, particularly I think what social media had done has knitted us together in much more closer, but also weirdly distant familial ties almost. So you can jump online and hear what someone's thinking on the other side of the world, their more intimate thoughts, where previously they were mediated through different kinds of institutions. So his idea that anxiety was infectious in social systems, I felt had been given, adrenaline, and been sped up by particularly social media. And just to see how people would have this experience of, perhaps in the past, someone who you talk to who's going to a really dysfunctional family gathering. It was almost people having that experience watching the news now or going online. And interesting how the two are bleeding together. So in pastoral ministry, you'd encounter some perhaps really toxic families and really dysfunctional families. But now the whole of society was beginning to feel like that in many ways. And even how different countries and, even seeing like world leaders tweeting at each other, almost like the bickering that would happen over a dinner table. I saw that the world increasingly is, the way to understand a complex world, that is a globalized world. It's a system of relationships that itself is also awash with anxiety.
One of the quotes you have in the book is this. Those who are more mature and healthy begin to adapt their behavior to appease the most irrational and unhealthy. This creates a scenario where the most emotionally unhealthy and immature members in the system become the de facto leaders. One thing I really appreciate about your book, and this quote captures it, is its explanatory power for what we are currently seeing, whether it's on the congregational level or all of society. On the congregational level, we've seen a lot of churches in the United States, especially white evangelical churches, that have been overrun with Christian nationalism, conspiracy theories, kind of a idolatrous worship of Donald Trump or the MAGA mob, and pastors who don't agree with that, but nonetheless feel powerless to combat it. And I feel like what I just read from your book explains that pastors are having to bend to the most immature and emotionally unhealthy people. Can you expand on that a little bit and explain why that's the natural response that we're seeing in this moment? Why otherwise mature godly leaders are capitulating to these kind of outrageous forces and damaging forces within their own congregations?
So in some ways what this is a tactic or a means of operating from the previous era being shown up as really ineffective in the current era. So what I mean by that is, if you look at particularly the contemporary church was built on the idea that it was able to broadcast and speak to large amounts of people. And we also saw this in the broader culture with, say, network TV or big companies. They were able to broadcast a really big message. Now, they had a nervousness that what if they weren't hearing the voice of the audience? So they invented things like public relations and focus groups to hear back from the audience. So they became very attuned to what the audience was thinking, and marketing was like, how do we get the consumer or the audience to hear what we're saying? Now, churches also did this as well. Churches realized that there was a lot of centralized power. They could be running in a direction. They wanted to suit the needs of their congregants. So the contemporary church model, which in many ways is modeled on some of these models we see in sort of business or whatever, had that idea of we need to have a feedback loop to hear what people in our congregation admits to thinking. Then social media comes along, and it gives this incredibly massive feedback loop, to the point where if you're trying to be reactive to perhaps a small piece of negative feedback in the previous way of operating, now you're just swamped with it. So, a lot of churches built their idea that we can have a church and we can please the consumer and we're going to keep everyone happy, and that's what our mission is going forward. Now, I don't think for a second that's a biblical model, but I think that was an intuitive model that many people picked up. So now in the new system, as anxiety fills the whole society, we try and respond to that and hear those voices, but those voices become overwhelming. And I think, to be honest, what was really interesting I found was, I think probably people, speaking to a lot of people in the United States, and as you mentioned, hearing that in, contemporary evangelical white churches falling into Christian nationalism. But what staggered me was seeing that happen in many areas of American life, watching from a distance, that I was really surprised by. Seeing that happen in Judaism, seeing very similar things happening in American Islam, seeing it happen in the New Age community. Even I remember reading an article about the knitting community being overrun by political battles and online wars. So there's something happening at a really meta level, where how we've arranged society and feedback loops is swamping people as this cultural anxiety takes over.
This idea that we've created a feedback loop in our religious systems is important, because in a consumeristic society, in order to maintain your institution, you have to attract a certain number of people to participate, to pay for it, to support it, which means that the leaders of these institutions have to be careful that they don't alienate those folks. So there is a sense in which the customer is always king and always right. And so these leaders are then sort of trained to not disrupt the anxiety system too much. And in a way, what it reminds me of is sort of an autoimmune disease, where the very thing that the system needs, which is stable, healthy, non-anxious leadership, is undermined by the fact that the system relies on the anxious people to keep it going. So what does that mean for leaders? And in particular, it feels like in a lot of our systems, the healthy, mature leaders who are trying to calm down the anxiety are actually attacked and kicked out. If you challenge too much of the anxiety of your own congregation, they're going to punish you for it. So how do leaders get beyond that, this autoimmune effect that's disrupting our ability to even have healthy churches?
That's a great term, autoimmune disease. So what Friedman said was that a leader, to bring health to a system, needed to be a non-anxious presence. They needed to go in the opposite direction of the anxiety of the system. And Friedman was very clear that that wasn't just the answer. Like, it wasn't you just decided, I'm going to become really non-anxious and go for a lovely walk in the morning and come into work feeling calm, and that's going to solve everything. He said that the individual, the leader who steps into a position of being a non-anxious presence will experience pushback. They'll experience what he even called sabotage, because there's an intimacy that comes with the sharing of pain and anxiety that is almost like a narcotic in some ways. So for example, anxiety, when we share it, it feeds something in us. So, you may be in a meeting, say you're listening to your boss and your boss is saying something and you're not sure. You'll then afterwards looking for other people as sort of feedback loops to say, oh, what did you think about that meeting? Now, if the other person says, oh, it was fine, and everyone in the meeting says, oh, it was absolutely fine, your anxiety gets pushed down a little bit. But if you're talking at the water cooler to someone and that person goes, yeah, I don't know, what about you? You can see how it creates what Friedman calls these sort of triangles of, it's almost gossip. In some ways, it's like these, that's how the sort of infection spreads. So Friedman was very clear that the leader for a period who was trying to step into a non-anxious presence would experience sustained pushback. And as the leader experienced that sustained pushback, they had to keep going. They had to persevere. And this is really difficult, I think, for mature leaders who've been brought up on the idea that their idea is to please everyone. So naturally, by being healthy, you're going to create a backlash, and it's not going to please everyone. And that in this sort of moment where people see growth as constant expansion in numbers, that's a really difficult thing to get our heads around for a lot of people.
So related to that is you talk about how in these anxious gray zone moments like we're in right now, it raises the value for people of comfort. So as much as they want to share anxiety with everyone else, they also come to value comfort above all else. This safety, this value of safety, of being with people who aren't going to challenge me, because there's so much anxiety out in the system. You want these enclaves where you can relax and be at peace. I see this all over the American church. I mean, for years we've talked about comfort and safety, and there's a radio network out there that talks about being safe for the whole family. From a Christian point of view, why is that bad? Why is it bad to want a church where I can feel comfortable and safe from the world around me?
Well, I think it just straight up contradicts the words of Jesus. He's descriptor of what life would be. Jesus said that in this life we'll have trouble, that people will come against us. He spoke of the gospel dividing even things like families, and there is an element that Jesus never promised anyone that this was going to be an easy life. Just looking at his life, Jesus for a period was followed by many crowds, but even when he's being followed by crowds, his family were turning up like, what on earth are you doing? There was division in his family. His family sort of came a bit more on board later on, but then the crowds went, and the religious establishment, the political establishment, the social networks that he was in, and then the broader culture, by the message of the kingdom of God that he was bringing into the world, he encountered the forces of sin, of the flesh, of the powers. So, the idea that we are promised a life of comfort, I actually think is more the mythology of this previous era that we're heading out of. We lived in this quite incredible time, I think, particularly from 1989 to perhaps, 2010, you put it in multiple places, 2008, 2010, who knows where. But the world had this, I've heard it called NICE. I think the British journalist James Forsyth came up with that term, which was no inflation, constant expansion. So the world had this quite significant period of peace, particularly in the developed world. And we had constant economic expansion. We had cheap money. We had cheap things from China. And in a sense, our living standards were never higher. That's now being challenged. And I think that part of what we're seeing in the culture where people are freaking out, that their comfort is disappearing, is also about the conditions materially in the world which are changing. Our Home Affairs Minister here in Australia had an article in the paper yesterday and basically said we're moving out of a period that's going to shock the Australian population, and I think this could be said anywhere in the developed world, where our living standards may drop and the kind of safer world that we're used to is going to go. So I think partially people are freaking out about the changes in the world, is looking at a more conflicted, challenging, complex world. But that's actually what the world's always been. It was more that we bought a myth that we were progressing to some sort of safe, secure, comfort, smooth world. That's getting smashed. But that's got nothing to do with Jesus.
But one of the things you mentioned in this desire for safety in this anxious gray zone is it pushes us toward fantasy. escapism, this alternate reality where we can escape from the challenges of this world and lose ourselves in a false one. I suppose there's infinite number of examples of this, but whether it's the metaverse or just even social media, the fantasies created by Hollywood and Disney, we don't like reality because it's too hard. How do you see that mindset coming into the church today?
Yeah. I think one thing that we've ignored, go back one step. One of the complaints that you'll often hear people saying today is people are less committed. They'll complain about millennials or Gen Z. They'll say, they're living this life. What are they doing? They come every 5 weeks. What's going on? In some ways, I think that's less blamed on emerging generations as it is the life script that we've coached and trained the next generation in. And in many ways, the sort of helicopter parenting of the West, and I use that term in terms of parenting, but also possibly even leading in churches and even culturally. There is this, we're almost, the helicopter parent has become in many ways the dominant myth for everything in society, hovering and protecting people. It's interesting, in Scandinavia, they call it the curling parent. So, the game of curling on ice where the parent goes ahead, polishing everything so everything's smooth.
Yeah.
And so for me, reality is a brilliant discipling tool. You can teach someone something informationally. You can teach someone how to. My dad said to me years ago, you can teach someone in a lecture hall about how to change a tire, but there's nothing like the first time you get your license and you get a flat tire and you've got to work out how to do it by the side of the road. And so I actually think that we're in a massive escape drive toward in culture of going to this fantasy world. And almost in some ways, you could say it's almost like a post-Christian sort of Gnosticism or Platonism where we want to escape this world and go to the better fantasy world. And you're seeing this, I think this is the metaverse. This is so many of the visions. You look at all of the popular culture in terms of Lord of the Rings and all these sort of fantasy worlds that people want to watch and escape to. But actually, I see reality as a resource. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a friend. For our podcast, we spoke to, a friend who, is one of the key leaders in the Iranian church. And just the way that the very real challenges of living in a culture like Iran has actually strengthened the church and given a much more deeper discipleship because they can't escape to a fantasy world. The realities of the world pushing into the church is very much there. So I think what we're going to see in the next season, I think particularly even around things as simple as energy crises and inflation and political upheaval and geopolitical conflict, is we're going to see reality push into the church. But I think the churches that will do well in the next season, from a kingdom perspective, are those that actually help people walk through that and have a biblical response to the breaking in of reality. I think the ones that try and give people a safe space to escape from the world on a Sunday, I think that model is going to increasingly fall over. It may look successful from the world's perspective, but I think it's going to fall over.
Getting back to Edwin Friedman and sort of the solution, or not the solution, but the remedy to this dynamic, he calls us to be a non-anxious presence within these anxious systems. You put it this way: we can only be a non-anxious presence with God's presence, which leads to a sort of different mastery of leadership, or a different framework for what we consider effective leadership. What do you mean by that? How is it different? What does this current age call us to be as leaders that wasn't necessarily called forth in the prior age?
Yeah. One thing I do in the book is I wanted to use Edwin Friedman's model of leadership, but I also had a primary problem with it, which is that in many ways his sort of idea of leadership is almost driven by a sense of human will. I simply realized that I don't have the ability to just be a non-anxious presence in this increasingly anxious world in my own strength. And then actually it was missing something. And Edwin Friedman was a rabbi, but it's interesting, you don't really see, or I don't see much of the sort of biblical worldview coming through. His answers are more psychological, or even looks back to sort of historical models of explorers and so on. And I sort of found that lacking. So what I'm encouraging people to do in this book is, I think there is a model of non-anxious leadership we see in the scriptures, and I use David as one example in the book. But what I wanted to explain to people is that we're actually operating, what the period that we're in, and there may be historical analogy to this at different points, but the historical period we're in, a grey zone is like a wilderness. And God uses wilderness in particular ways. I think people have used wilderness, particularly in the Western church, as this sort of like, oh, I'm going through a personal wilderness time, but it's very personal. I actually think we're culturally going through sort of almost a wilderness grey zone time. But when you look at Scripture, when you look at the forming of the people of God in Exodus, coming out of Egypt, when you look at the life of David, there's certain particular things that God does in wilderness spaces to prepare us for when we are in leadership. And so there's a preparing work, but then there's the wilderness that also often comes when we're in leadership. And I think what I'm noticing a lot of culture, part of the fantasy thing is that people expect that when they get a role, a vocation, be that in the marketplace or be that in the church, that it will provide us this sort of fulfilling existential answer. And then when actually people get into positions of leadership, they don't feel that. And so what I'm trying to show people in this book is that actually we can only really lead with the presence of God. That, if you look at scriptures, the presence of God is a constant companion. So sort of that line that you said there is that, I believe that we can only be non-anxious presence when God's presence is actually working through us. And it's interesting as well, when you think about the vision in the New Testament of the people of God as living temples, the temple is destroyed in 70 AD. And then the model of faith is not that a new temple is built. And you could even have a whole conversation about how we still try and build them.
Absolutely.
Post-Christian, where parliaments and congresses or sporting stadiums or malls or whatever. But actually, what the model of the New Testament is that each one of us is actually called to be a living temple. And a temple then contains the presence of God. So we're not just called to bring our non-anxious presence. That's just going to be purely Friedman's model, but in a worldly sense. What we're actually called to be is bring the presence of God, and the presence of God brings the peace of God, but also too, it will challenge the flesh. So, I think the presence of God is a healing balm to those who are humble, who are seeking it, but it's a challenging thing to people who are invested in the flesh and the powers and principalities and people stuck in sin and systems that are sinful.
Well, Mark, what I said earlier, this is not just an excellent book, it's a really important book, and that explains exactly why. I've encountered so many people talking about the challenges we're facing right now, and most of them tend to prescribe a tactical solution, some kind of strategy change or a structural change that the church needs to pursue, and there's a place for all of that. But what I appreciate about what you've done here is you've gone to the deeper inner life of the leader and the importance of that rooted communion with God and that self-differentiation that comes from that deep intimacy with God that allows us to be set apart from the anxious systems we're a part of. I felt for a long time that what's going to make the difference in the church today are godly, mature women and men who take up that responsibility to lead, rooted in their communion with God, rather than just the tactical kind of leadership that we've been addicted to for a long time. So thank you for this book. I think it's an incredibly important read that I can't recommend enough for anybody who finds themselves in challenging systems and are trying to figure out what it means to be faithful in them. So thank you so much for being here.
My absolute pleasure.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele, and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much more.